This is Mac OS Ken.
Gurman expects a new MacBook Air soon. France may land on Apple over privacy and ad issues. And 2 tales of Apple Watch. It is Monday, the 3rd of March, 2025. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken. Brought to you by yours truly and sponsored by Factor. Meals that are smart and delicious. Get 50% off your first box plus free shipping with code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/factorpodcast. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSCan. So I guess we're looking for a new MacBook Air this week. Anyway, Bloomberg's Mark Gurman is. A piece from Mac Rumors had Gurman hitting the hell site Sunday saying, I expect the M4 MacBook Air to be introduced as early as this week. Inventory has significantly wound down, and Apple is preparing a Mac-related announcement in the next few days. Soon after that, according to a piece from Apple Insider, Gurman expects Apple to introduce a new iPad Air that will possibly/probably be accompanied by a new entry-level iPad, according to Bloomberg's own. Anticipated changes for the devices will be internal, not external. Apple Insider says the new MacBook Air is expected to be powered by M4, with M4 Pro and M4 Max reserved for the MacBook Pro line. As for the iPad Air, it's thought that will pick up the M3 processor. So, are we thinking no spring event this spring? Is Apple opting instead to be in a state of constantly updating hardware? Doesn't really matter. Just kind of curious. A couple of ongoing legal issues for Apple. One, potentially pricey. Apple Insider ran a piece last week that said France is likely to issue an antitrust fine against Apple this month over app tracking transparency. You remember app tracking transparency, don't ya? That was the thing where Apple said, hey Facebook, hey developers, if you want to track user activity across other apps and online, you can do that. You just need to get their permission first. Such app tracking was actually par for the course before app tracking transparency, only without most of us realizing it. Hence the addition of transparency. The thing is, when you ask people if you can track them without illustrating a real benefit for the people you're asking, they tend to say no. And a lot of businesses that were making a lot of money tracking us without us realizing it found that spigot closed. And they complained, leading the French Competition Authority to open an antitrust investigation into Apple and app tracking transparency. According to Apple Insider, the argument was that Apple had apparently abused its dominant position by implementing discriminatory, non-objective, and non-transparent conditions for the use of user data for advertising purposes. When the probe was launched in 2023, the piece says Apple shared a statement to Apple Insider insisting it holds its advertising business to a higher standard of privacy than it requires for any other developer by prompting users for explicit permission before delivering any personalized ads. Having poked around, sources tell Reuters that the French regulator will issue a ruling in March, though the regulator will only say a ruling is expected in the spring. Assuming it goes against Apple, sources say it will likely include an antitrust fine. Such fines can be up to 10% of a company's global revenue, according to the report. Apple's other legal issue also comes from last week. This one brought to us by Mac Rumors. According to the site, the Cupertino company is being sued by buyers who say carbon-neutral claims around the Apple Watch Series 9, Apple Watch SE, and Apple Watch Ultra 2 are misleading. Citing a Reuters report, the piece says the lawsuit argues that Apple misrepresented the environmental impact of these 3 Apple Watch models by relying on carbon offset projects that did not provide genuine carbon reductions. The plaintiffs claim they would not have bought their devices or would have paid less had they known this. I'm sorry, do we get to haggle at the Apple Store now? Is that new? Interestingly, the plaintiffs don't argue against the idea of carbon offsets. Rather, they argue that these specific carbon offset projects meant to make Apple Watch carbon neutral were already in the works before Apple got involved. According to the report, the plaintiffs argue that because these locations were already managed under conservation protections for several decades or naturally heavily forested, Apple's financial support did not lead to a reduction in carbon emissions beyond what would have occurred naturally. As such, they seek an injunction to prevent Apple from marketing the watches in question as carbon neutral, and they're looking for unspecified damages because, of course they are. More news in a moment, but first a word from today's sponsor, Factor, helping you optimize your nutrition in 2025. With every new recipe I try to cook, there's a bit of trepidation. I can have the ingredients, I can have clear directions. Can't shake the feeling that I'm going to mess it up somehow. That's one of my favorite parts about Factor. They are great recipes that you cannot mess up. Chef-made and dietitian approved, they come to your door fully prepared, just waiting for your microwave and your enjoyment. And they are delicious. The white cheddar chicken and broccoli grits, and the queso fundido and ground beef with cilantro, cauliflower, rice, and roasted peppers are 2 of my recent favorites. I like them for the quality of the meats, the delicious sauces, and the sensational sides. But that's me. With about 40 options across 8 dietary preferences on the menu each week, it is easy to pick meals tailored to your tastes and your goals. See what they have for you. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/factorpodcast and use code FACTORPODCAST to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code FACTORPODCAST, all one word. Factor Podcast at factormeals.com/factorpodcast to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. And now, back to the wrist. Yahoo Finance has written up the latest profession to adopt Apple Watch. Referee for the National Hockey League. The piece had the Cupertino Company and the NHL announcing a system that includes the deployment of watches plus a special application that provides the refs with data like the game clock, a countdown to the end of a period, and a notification letting them know when a player is coming out of the penalty box. How will that work? It'll rely on a series of haptics so refs can focus on gameplay. Also, it's already working. Has been since the start of the season, according to the 2 organizations. An exec for Presidio, the company that makes the app, says being able to provide the official game clock on the wrist so the referees aren't looking up trying to find the scoreboard when they're skating, it was really important to make sure there's focus on the ice and the players and the play. What if they get distracted by something else on their watch? Well, they can't for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's not actually their watch. Refs use Apple Watch units given to them by the NHL and cannot use their own. And second, sounds like the Presidio app takes over the watch. Yahoo Finance says the watches are not loaded with unnecessary applications and only get notifications from Presidio's software. And finally today, the Apple TV Plus Mythic Quest spin-off Side Quest has a trailer. If you've forgotten about this one, how could you? Anyway, Engadget's here to help. The site says the new series will take on an anthology format, with a bunch of actors taking on leading roles for each installment. If you're not a Mythic Quest watcher, that might sound like a strange choice. While the show and its regular cast may be great, and they are great, some of the most touching episodes of the original series have involved characters we've never seen before and will not see again, who are only tangentially related to the regular show's action. I assume that the 4 episodes slated for Side Quest will be tied to Mythic Quest in some way. In fact, we know at least one will. Rob McElhenney, a writer, producer, co-creator, and star on MQ, figures prominently and rather disgustingly into the new show's trailer. To say I am excited would be an understatement. You can find your own level of excitement. You'll never guess where. The trailer is up now on YouTube. All 4 episodes of Side Quest hit Apple TV Plus on Wednesday, the 26th of March. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and sponsored by Factor. Get 50% off your first box plus free shipping with code FACTORPODCAST at factormeals.com/factorpodcast. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macosken. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.